You really gonna shut off my internet? On Christmas? I asked, gripping the router like it might come back to life if I just held on harder. Really? I'd lived through power outages, frozen pipes, and once even a raccoon that chewed through the fuse box. But this was different. It wasn't the storm, it wasn't a tech glitch, it was deliberate. My name's Daniel Mercer, and I live in the house my mother left me when she passed 3 years ago, just outside a little lakefront community called Evergreen Glade. Peaceful, mostly, tight-knit, until the HOA got teeth. I work from home as a systems consultant. The internet is my lifeline, which made what happened next feel personal. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if stories like this strike a chord. Anyway, Christmas Eve. The lights were still glowing on the pine tree by the window. My daughter, Zoe, she's 11, was video calling me from my ex-wife's place across the state. We were mid-sentence, mid-laugh, when the screen went black. Hey, then silence. I checked everything, reset the modem, cycled the router, even tried the mobile hotspot. Nothing, a dead zone. And I knew exactly who was behind it. Irene Mallory, HOA president, the kind of woman who puts her name in bold font on the bottom of every notice, as if we'd forget who wrote the ticket for having an unauthorized wind chime. We hadn't gotten along since the first board meeting I ever attended. Eileen didn't like that I questioned her $12,000 0-cents holiday decor budget, or that I asked if her cousin's landscaping company was licensed. From that day on, she'd been quietly poking the bear. But cutting the internet on Christmas? That wasn't just about control, that was cruelty. You see, this house, it's not just property to me. It's my mom. Her memory is in every beam, every scuffed floorboard, especially the porch swing out front. That's where she'd sit every December, sipping cider and humming old carols. When she got sick, I moved in to take care of her. That swing was the last place we sat together before she passed. It still creaks the same way, still faces the lake she loved. That swing, it's not just a seat. It's a promise I made that I'd protect what she left behind. So no, Irene didn't just cut off a signal, she severed a connection. The next morning, I drove down to the HOA office. Irene was there, of course, perfectly manicured, sipping tea from a mug that read, "I make the rules." "I'm here about the internet," I said, calm but firm. She didn't even look up from her desk. "We're investigating an unauthorized network extension you may have installed. It posed a potential hazard to the community system." "Hazard?" I laughed. "You mean the repeater I added to reach my office? That's been there for 2 years, approved and logged." Her eyes flicked up then, cold, sharp. "The board reconsidered, as of last week." "And you decided to disconnect me without notice? On Christmas?" She shrugged. "We follow protocol. Maybe next time, read the updates." There were no updates. I knew that. I checked every HOA document the night before. What she didn't realize was, when you mess with an IT guy's internet, you don't just make him mad. You make him meticulous. Back at home, I opened a file I hadn't touched since the funeral. It was labeled Mom, Mime, HOA Letter. I wasn't sure why I clicked it. Maybe instinct, maybe grief, maybe something deeper. A hunch that this wasn't just about me. The first letter in the folder was dated 2011. "Dear Irene, I am still awaiting clarification on the lawn drainage assessment you imposed. No one else on the East Loop was charged." My mom had been questioning things too, I just never knew. Outside, the porch swing creaked again in the wind. I stared out at it, heart heavy. Irene had been playing this game a long time, and if she thought I'd roll over like the rest, she had no idea what she'd just started. Because when someone cuts your cord, you don't just plug it back in. You dig into the wall and see what else they've wired behind it. The porch swing groaned again as I stepped inside, wind brushing through the screen door like it carried a warning. I didn't sit, not yet. I just stood there, reading my mom's letter over and over. That single sentence stuck with me. No one else on the East Loop was charged. This wasn't new, it was inherited. By the next morning, I had my own envelope on the doorstep, hand-delivered, no postage. Just that obnoxious HOA letterhead with Irene's signature bold and underlined. Violation notice, 3217, unauthorized exterior modification. My crime? A set of solar string lights I hung across the back fence 2 years ago. Same lights that had been there every summer. Never a problem. Now, suddenly, $125 0-cent fine. But that wasn't all. By the end of the week, I had 3 more. Improper shrub height, non-regulation mailbox color, and my favorite, unsecured trash bin during wind advisory. Mind you, there hadn't even been wind that day. It was obvious. Irene wasn't just retaliating, she was building a paper trail, a record that could paint me as non-compliant. Because if they stacked enough violations, the HOA had the authority to place a lien on my home. My mother's home. But I didn't respond, not directly. Instead, I started documenting everything. Dates, times, photos, digital scans. I even set up a backup router just to monitor connectivity logs. My careers in systems troubleshooting. I was raised by a woman who balanced every checkbook to the penny and kept tax folders in triplicate. They were playing checkers. I'd spent my life playing chess. At the next HOA meeting, I sat near the back. Irene didn't notice at first. She was too busy smiling for her loyal 4 board members who nodded at everything she said like they were auditioning for a commercial. But one of them caught my eye. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he wasn't looking at Irene at all. Louis Kane. Gray hair slicked back, wrinkled hands folded in his lap, a soft, withdrawn presence. The only one not clapping when Irene announced new community streamlining protocols. When she introduced a motion to review unpermitted network equipment, her eyes landed on me, just for a second. Some homeowners have taken it upon themselves to install potentially dangerous signal boosters. Not only do these interfere with HOA-monitored bandwidth, but they may also pose security concerns. That's when Louis finally moved. His right hand trembled as he reached into his folder and pulled out a paper. He looked down at it. Didn't raise it, just held it in both hands like it weighed too much to lift. Irene kept talking. Louis kept staring. The meeting adjourned 15 minutes later, and people filtered out in clusters, chatting about fence paint and parking passes. I lingered, waited until Louis stood alone, staring out at the pond by the clubhouse. "You knew my mom, didn't you?" I said. He didn't look at me at first, just nodded slowly. "She used to bring brownies to the meetings," he murmured. "Used to call us out, too, back when calling out meant something." "He kept notes," I said, watching his fingers twitch. "Detailed ones. She had questions. About Irene, about the HOA's number." Louis closed his eyes. Long, quiet. Then he whispered, "That woman never cared about community, just control." I waited. He didn't say more. But I didn't need more, not yet. I saw it, the regret in his face, the hesitation. Whatever Louis knew, he wasn't ready to share it. But he'd seen something. Maybe everything. And Irene? She was still smiling, still confident. Because people like her always believe the silence around them is obedience. They mistake quiet for consent. What she didn't realize was that I had already stopped being quiet. Back home, I scanned the new violation notices into a folder, color-coded them, made backups. I wasn't fighting just to win. I was building a case. As I logged the timestamps, I saw something strange. The night my internet cut out, system logs showed a manual override. Origin IP HAA. Irene hadn't just reported me, she'd flipped the switch herself. And now, she was on record. The log didn't lie. The override that killed my internet came from the HOA's own admin portal, and it happened at 9:42 p.m., Christmas Eve. Irene did it herself. I stared at the screen, heart hammering, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was tampering, and it meant one thing: she'd gotten sloppy. I didn't rush. I didn't confront her. I saved the log, encrypted it, and printed 3 hard copies, one in my safe, one in a weatherproof envelope under the porch swing, and one tucked in a book on my shelf titled How to Win a Tax Audit. Irene was overreaching, and when someone overreaches, they always leave a trail. I just needed to follow it. A day later, Louis showed up at my door. He didn't knock, just stood on the porch in his faded army coat, holding a folder like it was radioactive. "I'm not here officially," he said, eyes scanning the street. I didn't think you were. He handed me the folder. I noticed his hands again, trembling worse now, not just from age, from fear. These are minutes from 2 years ago, the real ones, not the ones Irene filed. I opened it right there in the doorway. They were handwritten. Sloppy penmanship, dated, signed, pages missing from the official record. She scrubs everything, Louis said quietly. Every vote, every transaction. She logs what she wants and burns the rest. Kept some for myself. I shouldn't have, but your mom asked me to once. Said to hold on to anything that didn't smell right. I looked up. You've had these the whole time? I've had guilt the whole time, he said. This is me trying to shift some of it. He didn't stay long, just patted my shoulder, then shuffled off down the walkway, like a man going back into a prison he couldn't leave. Inside, I spread the pages across my kitchen table. One line kept jumping out at me. Motion passed to approve holiday gala expenses, $9,700, 0 cents, to Bluegrass Events, Inc. That name rang no bells. And I'd been to that event. It was just a few plastic candy canes and a badly catered tray of chicken nuggets. $9 grand? Something was off. I dug into state filings, searched the contractor registry. Nothing. Bluegrass Events didn't exist. Not officially. No EIN, no registration, no address. Just a ghost company that got HOA checks. But what really froze me was the signature on the approval. Louis Kane. So I called him. You signed this, I said, skipping pleasantries. Together, de nom de Willigen. I didn't read the final version. He replied, voice hollow. We approved a $3,000 budget. She filled in the rest later and said it was a clerical error. Told me not to worry. You still have copies of those checks? No, but... He paused. I know someone who might. He gave me a name. Margot Peña, former HOA treasurer, resigned last spring, quiet exit. No one had seen her since. I mean, said Margot moved to Florida, Louis added. But she didn't. She's 2 towns over, and she's scared. I found Margot the next day in a modest 1-bedroom, the blinds drawn even at noon. She cracked the door and froze when I said my name. You're Charlotte Mercer's boy? I nodded. She let me in without another word. Her living room was piled with banker boxes, some labeled, some not. She made tea without asking, like she needed something to do with her hands. They were shaking too. She threatened my husband, Margot said, sitting across from me. Said if I ever spoke about the books, the board would review his building permit. Said she'd find mold, condemn it. He has heart issues. I couldn't risk it. But you kept records, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded toward one of the boxes. It's all there, every invoice, every canceled check, every missing dollar. I walked over, opened the lid. On top, a sticky note in a firm, slanted hand read, If something happens to me, start with December 2021. And there it was again, that same name, Bluegrass Events, Inc. I didn't touch anything else. I closed the box gently like it was made of glass. I looked back at Margot. Would you be willing to speak if it came to it? She hesitated, then reached for her tea. If I don't now, when? She didn't say Irene's name again. She didn't have to. Irene had built a fortress of fear around herself, but cracks were starting to show, and the people inside were done hiding. The internet was just the start. Now I had signatures, I had fake companies, I had whispers turned into witnesses. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to pull the whole house of cards down. Margot handed me the box like it was a confession, one of those quiet, resigned moments where someone knows they can't carry the weight anymore. I took it home in the back seat, seatbelt strapped around it like a passenger. No way I was risking that thing in the trunk. Once inside, I set it on the kitchen table beneath the soft glow of the ceiling light. The porch swing creaked again outside, as if reminding me I wasn't doing this just for justice. I was doing this for her, for Mom, for everyone who'd been bullied into silence. The first invoice I pulled out was dated 2 years back, Bluegrass Events again. Holiday lighting and staging, $8,400, 0 cents. The handwriting didn't match the treasurer's. The check number was out of sequence. And the address? A P.O. box in a town that didn't exist. I searched it anyway, just in case. Sure enough, no such P.O. box. Not even the zip code lined up. This wasn't sloppiness, it was architecture. I started logging every document, built a spreadsheet with columns for vendor name, amount, check number, service claimed, and, most importantly, discrepancies. There were a lot of them. $43,000 in questionable payments over 3 years, all tied to companies that had no corporate filings, no licenses, and in some cases, no Google footprint at all. It wasn't embezzlement on accident, it was routine. I dropped off a copy of the initial spreadsheet with Mel Tran, an old friend from my IT contracting days who left the private sector and now did forensic accounting part-time. She called me 20 minutes later. Dan, this isn't a mess. It's a blueprint for fraud. She created fake vendors. Probably routed the funds through someone she trusts. We'll find the link. Can you help me build the case? I asked. I'm already building it, she said. You're not the only one who's tired of people like this skating by. That night, I walked the neighborhood. Not knocking, just observing. A few houses had identical holiday lights, cheap, store-bought, definitely not worth four-figure line items. And yet I knew every strand had been billed 10 times over. I passed the Harmon house, nice couple, mid-60s. They were out front watering the rosemary bush by their mailbox. Evening, I said. Mrs. Harmon gave me a warm smile. Mr. Harmon just nodded. Then, out of nowhere, he muttered, she charged us twice for driveway resealing last year. Same job, same receipt. I turned. You filed a complaint? He shook his head. Didn't want to make trouble. That's how people disappear around here. Disappear. Not physically, but procedurally. Fined until they couldn't fight back. Outvoted at board meetings. Or sold out of their homes. Over $300, 0 cents weed violations. That's what Irene did. She didn't bark. She bled you slowly. And now, she had no idea the walls were closing in. The next morning, I received another fine. Violation notice, 3224. Unauthorized door color, 0 cents. The door, my mother's hand-painted robin's egg blue door. It had been that color since 1998, since before the HOA even existed. I laughed, out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so transparent. She was panicking, throwing whatever she could to make me flinch. Instead, I took photos, time-stamped, dated, then printed them in triplicate. I wasn't going to fight this her way. I was going to beat her at her own. After lunch, I visited the county assessor's website and pulled public records. Irene's name showed up in multiple HOA filings as president-treasurer for a period and authorized agent for something called Mallory Property Services, LLC. That wasn't in the HOA handbook. Searched the company. The only listed address was a P.O. box in the same fake town as Bluegrass Events. That was the moment it all clicked. She wasn't just laundering HOA money through ghost vendors. She was likely funneling it into her own shell company. That made this more than petty theft. This was fraud. Wire fraud, tax evasion, possibly racketeering. And now I had the first thread. I called Mel, found a name, Mallory Property Services. It's hers. Silence on the other end. Then, we've got her, but if you're serious, you need more than files. You need a motive. You need to connect the company to the HOA's bank account. And so I made a plan. Irene wouldn't hand that over, but someone might have access, someone on the board, someone already cracking under pressure. Louis. It was time to knock on his door. I parked in front of Louis Kane's place just before dusk. The old ranch-style house was quiet, drapes drawn like always. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, firmer. The door creaked open 2 inches. Louis's face appeared, half lit in the warm glow behind him. Eileen's been asking questions, he said without a greeting. About who I've been talking to? I didn't name you, I said. You didn't have to, he muttered. You stirred the water. She's watching everything now. I found her shell company, I told him. Mallory Property Services. She's routing HOA payments through it. I need bank account access or someone who knows where the records are kept. Louis's eyes didn't move, but his fingers tightened on the doorknob. She doesn't use the HOA office, he whispered. She keeps the real records somewhere else. I don't know where. You sure? His face twitched. She didn't tell me, but I saw her once. loading up a box. Big red plastic thing, had Ho Finance written on the lid in marker. She shoved it into her car and told me she was cleaning up for inspection. Did she say where she was taking it? She didn't have to. The address on the return label was her old storage unit. Evergreen Lockup, off Route 9. I nodded. That's enough. Louis looked like he wanted to say more, but he just closed the door gently, like ending a conversation he wasn't brave enough to finish. I didn't go straight to the storage place. Something felt off, too exposed, too traceable. Instead, I went home and opened the attic hatch. I hadn't been up there since Mom passed. The ladder groaned under my weight. The air was stale, thick with old insulation and cedar dust. A single bulb dangled in the center, casting a yellow cone of light on her old keepsakes. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just that I couldn't shake the feeling that something up here mattered. Then I saw it. A faded Rubbermaid bin with masking tape across the lid. Written in my mother's handwriting, Initial OOA 2006 to 2011, keep private. My breath hitched. I knelt and cracked it open. Inside were dozens of envelopes, handwritten meeting notes, photocopies of budgets, scans of invoices, some highlighted, some annotated in red pen. And on top, a manila folder labeled discrepancies. I opened it. My hands were sweating now. The first sheet had a list of names. Margot Peña. Louis Kane. And one more that stopped me cold. Jeffrey Tillman. Tillman had been the HOA accountant for 3 years before he retired without warning. Mom had drawn arrows connecting his name to checks signed off by Irene. Some were circled. A note read, "Reimbursement totals don't match QuickBooks log. Ask Jeffrey why." She never got that answer. Jeffrey disappeared from town before she got too deep. I kept digging. Halfway down the bin, I found something heavier. A small dented tape recorder. I turned it on, static, then my mother's voice. December 19th, 2011. Today, Irene told me to stop asking about the vendor forms, said it was above my pay grade. I'm starting to think this isn't just about budgeting. Something's missing, and no one wants to say it out loud. She coughed, then added softly, "If anything happens to me, I hope Daniel reads this. Maybe he'll be brave enough to finish it." I sat back on the attic floor, heart pounding. I hadn't planned on digging into this, I hadn't planned on revenge. But now, this wasn't just about the internet, or a fine, or even my mother's front door. This was about her. She knew. She saw it coming. She left the evidence, and trusted that someday someone would care enough to finish what she started. I pulled out my phone and called Mel. "I just found something," I told her. "A whole box, names, notes, a recorded log." Her voice sharpened. "This changes everything. We're not just talking about financial fraud anymore. This is premeditated concealment. Keep everything secured. I'll drive out tomorrow." I closed the bin, pulled the chain to the attic light. In the dark, I climbed down. The house was silent, still. Outside, the porch swing moved, just once. And I knew we were getting closer. By sunrise, the attic bin was in my car, buckled in like a passenger again. Mel arrived before I even finished my coffee, pulled up in a silver hatchback and got out with a clipboard already in hand. I waved her inside. She didn't waste time. "You said tape recordings?" she asked, setting her laptop on the kitchen counter. I handed her the recorder. She hit play. My mother's voice filled the kitchen. Mel's eyes narrowed. She was organized. "This isn't just a paranoid hunch, this is a timeline." I nodded. She suspected Irene years ago, tried to follow the vendor trails, and now I've got at least 2 false businesses tied to HOA checks and Irene's signature. Mel looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, and we're going to trace every penny. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a portable scanner. Within minutes, she was feeding documents through. Invoices, copies of checks, vendor contracts, handwritten notes. Everything was getting cataloged, built into a proper case file. Mel didn't just work fast. She worked quiet, focused. Her brow furrowed as the numbers rolled across the screen. This one here, she muttered, tapping a vendor form. Snowfall Events LLC, filed under an LLC in Montana, dissolved 2 years ago, and yet the HOA paid them last winter. That's interstate wire fraud, easy to prove. I leaned back. She's been running fake vendors for over a decade, and not one board member blew the whistle. Fear keeps people quiet, Mel said, but money keeps people loyal. Thought of Louie, of Margot, of my mom. They all saw it, they all stayed quiet until someone forced it into the light. And now, the light was coming fast. We spent the next few hours building a financial chain of custody. Vendor payments, fake EINs, irregular invoice dates, several checks written to companies registered under P.O. boxes, matching those tied to Mallory Property Services. Irene's shell company. Mel traced it to a community bank just outside of town. That's where the HOA checks are cashed, not deposited, cashed, she emphasized, which is what people do when they don't want a paper trail. I shook my head. How did this go unnoticed for so long? Mel gave a dry smile. Because people who run things assume no one's watching, and most folks don't know where to look. She paused. But you've got one more card to play. I raised an eyebrow. The HOA's nonprofit status. I blinked. What about it? Mel pulled up the IRS database, typed in our HOA's official name. Her mouth curled. Revoked, 2019, for failure to file Form 99S, which means they'd been operating illegally ever since, I finished. And collecting dues while posing as a tax-exempt entity, she added. That opens them up to criminal penalties. I stared at the screen. Irene hadn't just cut my internet, she'd undermined the structure of the entire community. Illegally. And now I had it all in front of me. The money trail, the revoked status, the shell companies, and the recorded voice of a woman who'd tried to stop it long before anyone listened. I stood up, walked to the front door. The swing outside was still, no breeze, no movement. I sat in it for the first time in weeks. The wood creaked under me, familiar, honest. Mom always said, some things take time to bloom. Justice is one of them. I looked back at Mel through the window. She held up her phone, already dialing the IRS whistleblower hotline. Wait, I said, stepping back inside. She paused. I want to do one thing first. She cocked her head. I want to give Irene one last chance to lie in person, so I can record it. Mel grinned. Make it count. I opened my drawer and pulled out a pen I hadn't touched in years, not for writing, just as a reminder. It was the same pen Mom used at the final HOA meeting she ever attended. This time, I wasn't just taking notes. I was setting traps. The next HOA meeting was set for a Wednesday evening, usual place, the community clubhouse. I could feel the weight of months pressing down on me. But I wasn't here to react. I was here to act. Mel and I had rehearsed every scenario. We knew Irene's tactics, gaslighting, deflection, and her signature cold stare that made people second-guess their own truths. But this time, I had evidence, and a recording device tucked discreetly in my jacket. The room buzzed with quiet chatter when I walked in, familiar faces, many too cautious to meet my eyes. Irene was already there, seated at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. Good evening, everyone, she began, voice smooth but sharp. We have important community updates. I waited. Then I spoke. Irene, I'd like to discuss the HOA's financials, specifically payments to vendors with questionable credentials. Can you explain why payments to Bluegrass Events and Mallory Property Services have not been accounted for properly? The room fell still. Irene's smile flickered, just for a moment. Daniel, those are routine expenses approved by the board. Approved by the board? I countered, even though the nonprofit status was revoked in 2019? Her eyes narrowed. The board operates under state guidelines. Any claims otherwise are unfounded. I pressed play on my recorder. My mother's voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. Today Irene told me to stop asking about the vendor forms. Heads turned sharply toward me, a few gasps. Irene's cheeks flushed red. You're playing dirty, she hissed. No, I said, I'm playing smart. Then I played the audio of her own voice, recorded 2 months earlier during a private board meeting, admitting she didn't answer to the IRS. Irene's face paled. That's taken out of context. I think the context is clear, I said, sliding a folder toward the community secretary. Here are copies of canceled checks, falsified invoices, and vendor records from companies that don't exist. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even some of her closest allies looked uneasy. Louis Kane shifted in his seat. His trembling hands gripped the table. I caught his eye. He gave a subtle nod. Then came the unexpected. Margot Peña, seated quietly in the back, stood up. Irene threatened my family when I tried to ask questions. Her voice shook, but was steady. She blackmailed us. I'm here to say the truth. The room fell into stunned silence. Irene's expression hardened. You're all lying. This is a witch hunt. A county official stepped forward. We have documents here that suggest possible criminal violations. We're opening an investigation. For the first time, Irene looked uncertain. The board members who once nodded unquestioningly now avoided her gaze. I glanced around, feeling the tide turn. The power she wielded had been built on fear and deception. Now that foundation was cracking. After the meeting, I walked outside with Louis and Margot. Louis finally spoke, voice heavy with years of regret. She did this for years, took what she wanted, and we stayed silent. Margot wiped a tear away. Not anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email Mel had just sent to the IRS whistleblower hotline. We've made the first report. The ball's rolling. Louis shook his head in disbelief. I don't know if she'll admit it, but now she can't hide. As the streetlights flickered on, I looked back at the clubhouse, once a place of silence and fear, now buzzing with whispers of change. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time it felt winnable. And for Mom, that was enough. The morning after the meeting, the neighborhood felt different. Whispered conversations drifted from mailboxes. Eyes followed me, curious, cautious. The walls Irene built were cracking, small fissures, but enough for the truth to slip through. Mel was already digging deeper. Over coffee, she laid out the next phase. The HOA's nonprofit status is revoked, she said, tapping her laptop. They've been collecting dues under false pretenses. That alone can trigger state investigations, criminal penalties. I nodded, absorbing the gravity. The weight of it pressed down on me like the winter chill seeping through my old windows. Next, Mel continued, we need to gather the official bank statements, deposit records, anything to prove money flowing through her shell companies. How do we get that? I asked. Mel smiled thinly. With a little patience and a lot of persistence. I spent the afternoon at the county clerk's office. The building smelled of aging paper and cold linoleum. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming softly as if eager to be done. I pulled the ledger for Evergreen Glade HOA, flipping through months of financial disclosures. Most were redacted or heavily edited, but a pattern emerged. Large cash withdrawals from the community account, always coinciding with Irene's board meetings. I photocopied what I could, old checks, signatures, endorsements. As I packed up, the clerk gave me a look. You're digging into the Mallory mess, huh? I blinked. You know about that? She shrugged. Everyone around here knows, but no one talks. You're braver than most. I left feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. Bravery didn't feel like enough. Back home, I sorted through the files. The fake vendors, the phantom expenses, the missing tax filings. They were all pieces of a puzzle, painted with deception. That evening, a new notice arrived, taped to my front door. Cease and desist all accusations against HOA board members or face legal action. I laughed bitterly. Threats weren't new, but this one felt desperate. Mel was unfazed when I called her. They're rattled. That means we're close. We spent hours drafting a formal complaint to the state attorney's office, attaching every shred of evidence we had. I thought about Mom, the way she sat on that porch swing, fighting quietly against the tide. I promised myself I wouldn't stop. Days later, the community clubhouse buzzed with tension. Rumors swirled like winter gusts, board members resigning quietly, neighbors whispering of lawsuits, a pending criminal probe. Irene's grip was slipping. One afternoon, Louis knocked again. This time he brought an old, leather-bound ledger. This was Jeffrey Tillman's, he said, voice low. Found it in his abandoned office. Said it might help. The ledger was brittle, pages yellowed with time. Inside, handwritten entries detailed transactions, dates, amounts, and annotations questioning missing funds. Eileen must have missed this. Louis said. I flipped through the pages, heart pounding. Here was proof, years of falsified numbers, smudged signatures, and unexplained withdrawals. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, I felt a growing fire. We arranged a meeting with a local IRS investigator Mel knew. She promised to look into the ledger and the other files. Weeks later, news trickled in. Federal auditors were reviewing the case. The HOA's shadow empire was unraveling. At night, I sat on the porch swing again, the cold air biting, but the stars overhead shining steady. I reached for my phone, dialing Zoe. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice warm. "No interruptions this time," I smiled. She laughed softly. I looked out at the lake shimmering under the moonlight. Some battles take longer than you expect, but some promises you keep no matter what. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Evergreen Glade, but the calm was deceptive. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered like an unseen storm. I'd thought the hardest battles were behind me, proof in hand, federal auditors digging into Irene's shadow empire. But retaliation came swiftly, subtle, and calculated. A week after the IRS announcement, I was flagged down by the local police, complaint filed by Irene herself. Noise disturbance, she claimed. Loud music late at night. The officers were polite but skeptical. My home office was quiet, just the soft hum of my computer fans. Still, I was taken in for questioning. It felt like a setup, a last-ditch attempt to intimidate, to wear me down, but this time I was prepared. Mel had already compiled my phone records and home security footage. The officers reviewed everything. Within hours, I was cleared of all allegations. "Sounds like you've been targeted," the lead officer said quietly, "but with evidence like this, you're solid." That night, I sat on the porch swing, exhausted. The creaking wood seemed louder now, a reminder of how close this fight had become. Then came Louis's visit. He looked older, worn by guilt and time. "She did the same to your mother," he said, voice heavy. "Threatened, harassed, tried to silence her. We were cowards back then." I reached out, grasped his trembling hands. "Not anymore." His eyes filled with tears. "You're fighting for more than a house. You're fighting for dignity." The next morning, I filed official harassment complaints with the state attorney's office. This was no longer just about money. It was about safety and justice. Neighbors began approaching me, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The Johnsons, who'd once whispered about causing trouble, now thanked me for standing up. The family 3 doors down, forced out by inflated fines, sent me a letter expressing relief and hope. Even Margot called, her voice steadier than before. "Irene's losing control, I can feel it." But the threats didn't stop. More letters, veiled warnings, anonymous calls in the dead of night. One night, my security camera caught a shadow lurking near the porch swing. I didn't sleep. I shared the footage with Mel. "This isn't just legal, it's personal now." She nodded grimly. "Stay vigilant." Yet despite the fear, there was a new energy in the community, a quiet solidarity. At the local coffee shop, conversations shifted. People talked about HOA reform, transparency, and reclaiming their neighborhood. Irene's fortress was crumbling, but she was desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous. I tightened my grip on the pen Mom had left me, the same one I used to prepare my notes for the upcoming hearing. This fight was far from over. But for the first time, I believed victory was within reach. News travels faster than whispers in a small town, and once my fight hit the radar, it didn't take long before the whole community was abuzz. The day a local journalist reached out, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She wanted to cover the story. The HOA's fraudulent practices, the threats, the retaliation. I handed her the evidence carefully. The invoices, recordings, and the ledger from Louis. Within hours, a segment aired on the local news. Homeowners accused HOA president of financial fraud and harassment. The title alone made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The video showed clips of the evidence, interviews with neighbors, and footage of the last HOA meeting, my mother's voice echoing through the room. The community's reaction was electric. Doors that were once shut tight now cracked open. People exchanged glances at the mailbox, whispered in the coffee shop, and a few even dared to approach me on the street. One neighbor, a middle-aged man named Harris, approached me nervously outside the grocery store. "I've been scared to speak up," he confessed, "but seeing this, maybe it's time." The weight I'd carried alone for months was suddenly shared. But not everyone was pleased. Irony's camp rallied. That very evening, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. Rumors swirled that she planned to push back hard, discredit the claims, threaten lawsuits, and reassert control. I knew I had to be there. At the meeting, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Irene arrived flanked by two loyalists, their faces set in grim determination. She opened with a fierce statement. "This is a smear campaign," she declared. "These accusations are baseless and defamatory." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. When my turn came, I stood and addressed the room with calm resolve. "I'm not here to tear down this community," I said. "I'm here to protect it from corruption, fear, and silence. This isn't about me, it's about all of us." I laid out the evidence again with photos, documents, and recordings. This time I was prepared for her attacks. I answered her every claim with facts, data, and the voices of witnesses who had suffered in silence. Midway through, Luis stood. His hands were steady now. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said. "This isn't just about money, it's about trust broken and lives affected." Margot nodded beside him, adding, "We've been afraid for too long." The room shifted, some heads bowed, others looked away. Irene's expression darkened, but cracks showed. As the meeting ended, I felt a subtle victory in the air. The tide had turned. Later, as I walked to my car, I saw neighbors gathering in small groups, talking, planning, hoping. The fight was far from over, but the community was waking up. And with each step I remembered my mother's words, "The strongest roots weather the harshest storms." Tonight, those roots were growing deeper. The day of the town hall meeting arrived with an almost surreal calm. Outside the community center, neighbors gathered in quiet clusters, exchanging nervous glances and hushed words. The air was thick with anticipation, and beneath it all, a simmering hope. Inside, the hall buzzed with energy. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised dais where the HOA board, local officials, and county representatives had taken their seats. At the center sat Irene, her posture rigid, eyes sharp but betraying cracks of unease. Across from her, I stood, clutching my folder of evidence and feeling the weight of every moment since this all began. The county attorney called the meeting to order. "We're here to review serious allegations against the Evergreen Glade HOA board. Evidence has been submitted indicating possible financial misconduct and abuse of authority." I stepped forward and pressed play on the speaker system. The room filled with my mother's recorded voice from years ago, her determined tone echoing through the silent crowd. Faces shifted, some closed eyes in remembrance, others exchanged shocked looks. Next came Mel's detailed presentation. Line by line, she laid out the financial discrepancies. False vendors, unaccounted payments, forged signatures, all linked unmistakably to Irene and her inner circle. Irene's defenses came next. She attempted to deflect blame, pointing fingers at absent members, questioning the chain of custody for documents, and accusing me of conspiracy. But the tide had turned. Luis rose, his voice steady and firm. "I was part of this board," he admitted. "I signed off on things I didn't understand, things I now regret. I can no longer protect lies." Margot, seated beside him, added her testimony of intimidation and threats, confirming the atmosphere of fear Irene had fostered. A murmur swept through the audience. Some nodded, others wiped tears quietly. When it was my turn again, I spoke plainly. This fight isn't just about numbers or contracts. It's about community, trust, and standing up when others stay silent. My mother believed in this neighborhood, not the corruption that's been allowed to fester. As I closed, applause erupted, a ripple of validation that filled the room with warmth and release. Irene's face paled as county officials announced a formal investigation and the suspension of the HOA board pending further action. She was escorted out, eyes darting between the crowd, now a mix of pity and contempt. The room felt lighter, hope replacing years of oppression. Afterward, neighbors approached me one by one, some shaking hands, others offering quiet words of thanks. I spotted Margot, smiling through tears, and Louis, a weight lifted from his shoulders. Outside, the porch swing awaited in the fading daylight. I sat down, feeling the creak beneath me as the cold evening breeze swept through the neighborhood. I called Zoe. "We won't forget this Christmas," I told her softly. "No, Dad," she replied, "we're just getting started." A year had passed since that night in the town hall, but the chill of winter still lingered outside as I stood on the porch, brushing snow off the porch swing. It creaked softly under my weight, a steady reminder of what had been lost and what was reclaimed. The neighborhood felt different now, the air lighter, the silence less heavy. Neighbors smiled more openly, kids played where once there had been wary glances. The HOA was no longer a fortress of fear, but a community slowly healing. Irene's trial was underway, her fate sealed by the mountain of evidence we unearthed. Tax fraud, wire fraud, intimidation, charges that echoed through the courthouse like a verdict not just on one woman, but on years of abuse. My phone buzzed, a message from Lewis, "Your mom would be proud." I smiled, eyes scanning the familiar vista. The lake shimmered under the pale winter sun, the same view Mom loved. The porch swing was no longer just wood and nails. It was a symbol of truth, legacy, and the endurance of a family's love. Inside, my daughter Zoe's laughter echoed over the video call. This time no interruptions, no dead screens, just connection. I told her, "Some connections you just don't cut." She grinned back, "Never." This fight was never just about me or the internet. It was about standing for dignity, for fairness, for the promise that legacy isn't erased by threats or silence. And as I looked at the snow-covered street, at the neighbors reclaiming their voices, I knew one thing. Justice is more than a verdict. It's a community restored. If you're facing struggles like mine, know you're not alone. Where are you watching from? Share your story in the comments. Let's make sure every voice in neighborhoods like ours is heard. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up, fighting back, and winning. Because sometimes the smallest swing can carry the heaviest weight.